Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. And welcome and thank you for joining us for Fashion Studies Alliance's ongoing series called Getting to Know. My name is Natalie Nudell. I'm a founding board member of the Fashion Studies Alliance. I'm also an associate editor at the Fashion Studies Journal, which brings us to our amazing guests today. We are getting to know Laura Snelgrove, recently appointed editor-in-chief of Fashion Studies Journal, an editor of the um, widely popular and very important issue by Fashion Studies Journal on fashion and motherhood. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much, Laura, for being willing to do this with us today.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I'm so happy to be here. And hi, everybody.
Well, I think we'll get right into it. And I wanted to ask you if you could introduce yourself and just like tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Sure. Well, of course, I'm Laura Snelgrove. I am currently in Montreal. I've been back here for about 5 years after having been in New York for grad school at Parsons and then teaching there for a few years after graduating. Before that, I'd been in Montreal as well when I was an undergrad at McGill. And before that, I grew up in Toronto. So all of those places definitely sort of inform where I'm coming from as a fashion studies person, as an editor, as, with everything that I do. I studied cultural studies at McGill, and it was there that I was first kind of taking a critical lens to the pop culture that I'd always really loved and absorbed and been really hungry for. I've always loved stuff that was considered really frivolous and silly, and I still do. Love fashion. I also love like celebrity gossip and that sort of stuff. And it was really exciting in that program at McGill to become critical of those things while still enjoying them and find that there was a way to balance those parts of my brain and myself. So that's often sort of the angle that I'm coming from when I look at fashion. I wrote a thesis there at McGill on a fashion topic. It was about the switch from illustration to photography as the main visual medium in fashion magazines that happened over the course of sort of the early half of the 20th century. And then got in my head that I should probably keep going with that, and learned about the program at Parsons that was just starting back then. I was part of the first class of the MA Fashion Studies program there, where I wrote on fashion and violence. My thesis there was about McQueen and the way that violence sort of was present in his work. And I was also looking more widely at the way that violent imagery especially is pervasive in fashion, and trying to figure out why and how. And then I ended up teaching a course at Parsons the first year after I graduated that was on that subject, on fashion and violence. Then I started the Intro to Fashion Studies course there, the lecture course that is still going on. And then about 5 years ago, returned here to Montreal, where I've not been in an institution in the same way. I taught a little bit at UQAM, the Université de Québec à Montréal, and then have mostly focused on sort of research, writing, and editing. And yeah, I feel at this point that having that distance from the kind of core of the fashion studies universe, as much as that's been at sometimes difficult personally, it was a tough thing to do, to leave Parsons. It didn't go the way I would have wanted. It was something to sort of recover from. But in that time since, I do feel I've started to see that as a blessing, to be at a distance from sort of the center of the action and be able to have some perspective and say, I'm here in a smaller city with less of a fashion studies community and less of a tie to that world. And it allows me to remain critical in a good way.
Absolutely. And It's interesting to have that perspective, and I also think how you've maintained your position as an editor and really central figure of Fashion Studies Journal sort of allows you to like go back and forth within that role. Can you tell us a little bit about the Fashion Studies Journal and how it came about and your contribution to it? And of course, please talk to us about your new appointment.
Ooh, well, thank you. I'd be very happy to. Yeah, we started FSJ while we were still students at Parsons in our last year there. So it was 2012. There was a group of 5 of us as the core founding editors, and it was meant to be a place for student work when it was, there were very few fashion studies journals at the time, and there still is a small number, but it was even smaller then. And the idea was there's lots of great work happening at the master's level that doesn't necessarily have another place to go to be published. And it was also a chance for us to experiment a little bit with, creating a publication. And so after that one issue, when we finished school, we were all, of course, going in different directions. And so there wasn't going to be the same kind of regular publishing schedule there might have been. And we instead morphed a little bit into doing some events that were meant to be community building. The idea was partly that in New York, especially, there are this handful of programs where people are studying the same kind of material, and there isn't a ton of opportunity to connect and get to know each other and build bridges between those little pockets. So that was part of our idea was let's have essentially dinner parties, but that are structured, that have some kind of I don't want to say networking, that's not such a cynical idea, but just where there's intentional community building happening there. So we kept that going for a little while, and it wasn't until 2016 maybe, when Kim Jenkins, who's one of our founding editors, she said, I think we have something here and let's not let it go. Why don't we try to sort of revive the actual journal portion? And she had a ton of amazing ideas, only some of which we were able to execute, but we basically got the website going at that point. And the website has continued on. It's now about 5 years that we've been publishing regularly. Of course, it changes a little bit. We used to be in a strict sort of issue format. Then we went to more of a rolling publication, and it all depends on the capacity of the editors at the time, what people are able to do, how often we're able to meet, and the contributions that we're getting. And so at this point, we have a really wonderful team that's been essentially the same core team for a few years now. And as you of course know, we've just added a couple of new editors that we're really, really excited to have brought on board. And we try to meet once a week. We have a very loose, free way of doing things where, again, it's capacity based, because we are all doing this out of love for the publication and love for the subject matter and love for the community. But it really is, it changes form every so often, and we try to be as open as we can. And in terms of me being the editor-in-chief newly, I do feel very sort of embarrassed about that and very shy about that, but I'm trying not to. That's Lauren, who's been our editor-in-chief for many years. She's had to step back in order to work on a book that she's putting out next year. So because I had just finished the Fashion Motherhood issue, I think it made sense to everyone that I'd sort of taken on a bunch of extra tasks to get that issue completed. And maybe I could just keep doing a lot of those tasks. So that's how I see it, is that right now I have more capacity than the rest of the editors to do the kind of mundane, taking in submissions and sharing them around to the other editors and doing some of the sort of management. I have a bit more time and energy for that than anyone else. So even though I feel we're all in a super collaborative team, everybody is an editor, I don't mind taking on that little bit of extra responsibility right now and kind of being, I don't think I'm not going to be making any decisions unilaterally or anything, but it's more about like if the buck has to stop somewhere, then I don't mind being that person for now.
And you are modest, Laura. Please tell us about. I know that you were, as you said, FSJ has gone through some transitions, and recently we also have gone through a new MO and a new mission. And I know that a lot of your vision for FSJ was included in that. So can you share with us a little bit about this new mission and also your sort of thoughts about Fashion Studies Journal? And for those of you who are on with us today and maybe not be so familiar with the Fashion Studies Journal, if you could tell us a little bit about what someone may find there if they visit.
Sure. I mean, this feels like an opportunity to sort of work on my elevator pitch of what FSJ is. I don't know. I haven't had to do that too many times. But I think that we've honed the vision, again, together collaboratively over the last year as a team, where we realized this was partly, pandemic inspired. This was partly last summer inspired. And we've determined that it makes the most sense and it's the most important to us, and it's going to be worth our energy most if we're looking to make change with what we publish. If we are angling our content towards something a little bit more radical in the field, looking to be transparent as much as possible about what it takes, not just to work in our field, but also to what it means to engage in fashion in this moment in late capitalism. And what does it mean? How do we ethically engage with fashion? How do we change fashion studies from within in whatever capacity we can? And we called that being activist oriented in our new mission statement. So as much as we absolutely love straightforward fashion history, there are other places to publish that. As much as we might love to read stories of how people have made it and have triumphed in the field, we're also interested in hearing how it's been difficult and why, and what are the systems and the structures that have created that difficulty. And looking again, always to build community, always to make connections between people doing this kind of work, and to try to bring people together in a positive way. That's, I hope, what people will find when they come and check out FSJ.
Oh, you summed it up beautifully, I think. I also wanted to tell everyone in our audience that if you have any questions for Laura, we will have a Q&A section at the end of this. So please feel free to either save your questions to ask directly or type it in the chat box at any point during this conversation. So Laura, I wanted to move on and talk about the fashion and motherhood issue, because not only is it an extremely exciting issue on a very important topic, a topic that I know is very dear to you and very personal. I know that also is a very successful issue for FSJ, for the Fashion Studies Journal. We know we got so much feedback and so much response back about it. So I wanted to know if you could share a little bit about sort of how the idea came about, how you conceived of it, how you went about it. And I know that we had, you commissioned really fantastic imagery and fantastic visuals for it. So if you could share the issue with us and tell us a bit about it, I know that the audience would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I think this is probably a very famous term, and I only learned it recently, so I don't know who to attribute it to. But I was just I've just come to know about sort of research as me search, where we are often attracted to subjects that are personal to us, that have some place in our own lives. And for me, that's definitely been true. And coming to terms with that is also part of my journey, is like, why do I only want to study stuff that's like about my own life? I don't know. I don't necessarily find myself endlessly fascinating, but it's just the way it keeps working. Like when I had written about fashion and violence, that was something, I'd experienced violence in my life and wanted to work through that through research. And that was a super healing process. So when a year and a half after graduating from Parsons, I had my first son and felt that there wasn't much that I could access in fashion studies, in fashion at all, that addressed the experience of becoming a parent, and particularly for me becoming a mother. And so even back then, and this was 2013, even back then I was thinking, this is a new avenue for me. This is somewhere I'm gonna feel like I have to go at some point, and had always had in mind the idea of bringing other writers, researchers, scholars together to have a diversity of voices talking about what motherhood looked like for them as people engaging with fashion. So I always had the idea of sort of an edited collection, but it was not something I was going to be able to put together while I was teaching, working, and also raising a baby, and then a few years later another baby. So it's been in the back of my mind for a long time, mostly wanting to hear what other people had experienced in that way, again, of this sort of community building thing of, it always helps to hear how other people have gone through the same thing as you, and or something similar but really different can also bring so much richness to your experience. So I think it was just over a year ago that I finally had the momentum and thought, okay, I'm going to start this as an FSJ project. We'll put a call out through FSJ, and then always had in mind that I'd also like to put together a book, like an edited academic volume, and just wanted to see what's going to come in, what are we going to get, and where will it go from there. And it was, of course, bad timing pandemic wise. I think we put the call out in February and started getting submissions soon after and didn't know what to do. And early in the pandemic, I was like, wait a second, this doesn't matter anymore. No one's going to care about this. Who could possibly want to talk about, being a mom and wearing clothes? Like, who cares when, in the early pandemic, it felt, things felt so much more dire, urgent in that direction. And then, of course, I think over the course of the pandemic, motherhood has become a really important subject because it has changed. I think the experience of motherhood is different when there's childcare available versus when your children are at home, when you're working out of the house, versus, brought back into it. So there was so much sort of popular media conversation about parenting, and specifically, gendered parenting, and the way that old gender roles were kind of rearing their heads. And I ended up thinking, okay, actually, maybe this is going to be important to continue talking about. So, of course, we also got very, very lucky that so many wonderful submissions did come in. People from all over the world found that they had something to say, and we were able to put together this issue, which has 17 pieces. And then also there is now a book proposal that's out and, hopefully moving forward with another group of 18 chapters that are more sort of traditional scholarly work, but also have a really exciting range of topics. So yeah, there's now these sort of two streams for that content that came in, and it's been, it's been such a rewarding experience for me. I think that I sometimes look at editing as a bit of a lazy way to do research myself. It's like, I can't possibly research every facet of fashion and motherhood myself. So if I ask other people to go out and do all the research and write it up for me and then send it to me, then it's like this, it's like a trick. I feel like I got a shortcut to all this knowledge and all this wonderful work because they're sending it to me and I'm going to read it. And I get to then learned so much from it, and all I had to do was ask other people to go do the work. So I am really, really grateful to all the contributors who have just done such great stuff. And you're right, there's a lot of great visual work as well that I'm excited to show. We'll go through the issue a little bit.
Wonderful.
And it's, yeah, in general, I just feel really, really grateful for all the connections that I've been able to make with these contributors too. It's been wonderful to meet all of them. And a lot of them I've had, extensive conversations with, feel like I've gotten to know them, feel like I've, understood their stories. And yeah, just super grateful.
And did you get a range of, were your submissions from a specific sort of area, or was it really, global? What was the furthest reach of your contributions?
I mean, in terms of geography, I think the furthest one was probably from Hong Kong. And I absolutely love that piece. It's for the book, it's in the book proposal. It's about Carrie Lam and the CEO of Hong Kong using fashion to create an image of herself as sort of the mother of Hong Kong, and the way that she used that in a authoritarian way to crack down on the sort of bad children, the protesters, and the way that motherhood was kind of weaponized, and rather than being used as a sort of a system of very soft symbols, instead it was like, mother's in charge here, you're all in trouble. And
Strict.
Exactly. I think that it's really exciting on the one hand to have, like, motherhood means so many different things, and it also can be a scary authority figure. And it's also just a great look at how politicians and other public figures use the idea of motherhood and the symbols of motherhood to create their personas.
Fascinating.
So furthest away, but I mean, of course, it's fashion studies, so there are limits to how far and wide it goes, right? It's all English language. This is something we talked about recently at FSJ. We'd love to be able to help bring in content from non-Anglophone places, but what are all the barriers to that? Mostly it's, not having money to do translations. And so that's tricky. It would be great to have more content from Latin America, for instance, but we haven't yet figured out how to, build that bridge in an effective way. So again, it's fashion studies. There are more submissions from North America and Western Europe than other places, but there is a broader range than I might have thought, and so I'm excited about that.
Wonderful. And before you show us some of the visuals and what the actual issue looks like, I wanted to ask you, motherhood, and I know that you and I have had this conversation. There's like an implicit sort of gendering there. And I know that this was something that you had to grapple with, right, when you were sending out the call for papers and all of those things. So I wanted to ask you about how did you grapple with it? What were your thoughts on it? And when you got the articles that came back to you, how did you feel like that was represented?
Great question. It's really important to me that motherhood not be talked about as something that is exclusively experienced by cis het women. Queer parenthood is something that isn't represented in this collection, and it's something that is close to me in my life. I live in a community of queer people here in Montreal. Those are my closest people, and many of them are parents. A growing number of them are parents as we get older, and to not have their experience included is I don't want that to be erasure of their experience. I want that to be an opening that someone needs to fill. It's definitely become a research interest for me, in that I would love to, do a little ethnography of queer parenthood and, non-binary parents who might use the term mother themselves, even if they don't identify as women. I think it's interesting to think, what does motherhood mean if it's separated from needing to be cisgender. So there's a ton of questions that I still have, but it was important to write that into the call for papers, to write that into my letter from the editor, to say this isn't meant to be an exclusive term. It just does get hard. I think we all know this with writing. It's like, it doesn't feel, it's not just convenient, but it's really difficult to change every time you're going to use mother to say, you know, parents who identify as mothers or something. You know, it gets tricky with words. So I tried my best to put sort of a disclaimer and say that that is what I mean by motherhood, is that it's this inclusive term that's for anyone who wants to identify with it. And especially, you know, that also relates to non-biological parents, that they are not excluded from the idea of motherhood just because a lot of the people who wrote in here had experienced biological pregnancy and delivery. You know, there's so many different ways to mother, and I just hope that in future collections, you know, I would love to do a fashion motherhood 2 in a couple of years or something. And I would love to include more experiences that diverge from my own, especially.
Wow, so interesting. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. So can you share with some images with us, or I could share my screen? Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, okay, I'll share my screen because I have the homepage of FSJ ready there.
Right.
Then let's see, hopefully this will work well. Is that good? Do we have it
Yes.
here? Okay. So this, I'll click on this picture because the coloring is a bit odd when it's on our main homepage, but this was the picture that, I don't know why it's being slow now, but of course it is. This was the picture that I commissioned, as you said, from a wonderful friend who's you know, my favorite artist. She goes by Sultana Bambino as her artist name, and I call her Sam, so I'll refer to her as Sam. And she and I spoke on the phone, and I said, can you draw me something that's like a utopia for all different kinds of mothers? Like, you know, having had this conversation with her previously, just what you and I have just said is sort of like, you know, a mother isn't one thing. You know, a family doesn't just look like one thing. And can we have, you know, kids of different ages? So it's not just about being pregnant, because I think when you say fashion motherhood, people often go to maternity wear, for instance. Like that's, and it was just like, no, you know, motherhood continues on, and dressing as a mother really continues on after pregnancy forever. And so I thought, you know, can we have this mix of, I just want to see the real colors. Yeah, the colors are more brilliant in this version here. So she is awesome, and she created this, you know, in a day, and including things I said, you know, can we invent some garments too? Like I want it to be a futuristic utopia with garments that don't exist, you know, in our reality, that are, you know, maybe based on sort of traditional carriers from other parts of the world, but that can also look like something that has never really existed. So she really did a great job putting together this, you know, designing this future for me, designing this utopia for me. She also, I have to mention, has just turned it into a beach towel, this image. And so she's gonna, I know, one of these, you know, one of these websites where you can create such products.
Yeah,
exactly. So we'll be sharing that on our social media, because I need to have one of my own immediately. I need to lie out on the beach on this image. I cannot wait. So the rest of you also can very soon. She'll be selling those, and we can, we'll share that on the FSJ social media. But of course, this is just my issue, my letter from the editor, where I'm explaining what the issue is all about. But I have to also mention that beautiful piece of work by Amy Gilmore, who's an artist who did a few pieces in the issue, and who also had a personal narrative story of when her husband had COVID. And I love this picture. I love it so much. I mean, it's not just a picture, right? It's a sculpture that she made using her kids' baby clothes. And to me, it just says everything. It's like this naughty, complicated thing. It's a mess. It's, you know, trying to freeze in time this moment when your children are small, and, you know, their clothing that's just about you know, they grow out of it so quickly, and this is what they leave behind, and this is, you know, sometimes all you have left of the idea of when they were a baby, because you're so sleep deprived that you don't remember it at all. So it just, to me, this ball of old laundry scraps just says everything. So I had to include it here. And yeah, okay, so this is Amy's piece again at the top here. This was the section on mothering in the pandemic, which of course, you know, we weren't going to be able to avoid mentioning how different it felt to mother in the pandemic, to parent, when things turned upside down. And so Amy has this really beautiful piece, and I'm really grateful to her. It's very vulnerable and really special. And then that's my own piece, again, illustrated by Sam, and I'm really grateful for that. And this is, you know, I love this picture. I love this. Whoever gets to have like a little cartoon drawing of themselves, I feel so lucky. And then this piece by Sarah Kaufman is awesome. It speaks about how she experienced the lockdown in Italy during Fashion Week, and then basically had to go from being at Fashion Week, being, you know, a fashion journalist at Fashion Week, you know, right in the middle of everything, to being locked down with her toddler. And that is just like, you know, the craziest juxtaposition of different parts of herself that she experienced, you know, in such a dramatic way. And also then she makes the connection between the idea of confinement in lockdown with the way pregnancy was treated for centuries, right? As a time that a woman would become confined in order that, you know, she not be seen and have, because you wouldn't want any strangers to know that you'd ever been sexual, of course. Then these art pieces are so wonderful. This is more of Amy's, the discarded pacifier. She has a series where she takes pictures of pacifiers that she finds on the ground. And it's kind of amazing how many of them she's found, but to anyone who's had a baby or cared for a baby, you know that it is not surprising at all. They are, you know, tossed aside and thrown out of the stroller, and you lose them. And finding one on the ground is kind of a heart-wrenching thing, because you know how difficult that made that parent's afternoon if that pacifier was lost, you know. And I also think that they're interesting as an object, because they're sort of among the first little accessories that we give to a baby. And of course, they're always really gendered, and like always have, you know, a lot of them have weird messages that are sort of determining how that kid is supposed to be. And that stuff is really interesting to me. These collages by Jennifer are beyond. I absolutely love them. This one was, of course, censored on Instagram. And then this section on changing bodies and shifting identities is really lovely personal narratives. They're all really, really different. They all use clothing as a lens on life changes and the way that clothes tell the story of moving from one self to another. And so, you know, this is another place where this is all about, you know, biological parenting, because the body changes and therefore your clothes change and therefore your identity changes, and those things are all mixed in together. So again, I feel like this is leaving open space to talk about non-biological parenting and some of the ways that that works differently, but still it's an identity shift that, you know, is forever. But these are all wonderful. And I mean, this one is so interesting. This one by Maya at the bottom, she was the only person whose narrative was really staunchly pro getting dressed up, even when you have a small baby at home. And I really wanted to include it for that reason, because it's so easy to fall into the idea that, you know, parenting makes you forget all about trying to look nice, or, you know, in the same way that lockdown has done, you know, the same way that COVID has done to people working from home. It's like as if it's automatic that you're going to give up. And definitely that rings true for me. But for Maya, it was like, wait, no, I'm not going to stop, you know, wearing my nice clothes. I'm not going to live in fear of having my nice clothes ruined. I'm going to still, you know, celebrate the clothes that I have, and, you know, celebrate the self that those clothes allow me to be. And so I really like that as a counterpoint to a lot of these other narratives that are more like my own, of kind of, feeling a bit lost. Then this video is our interview with the curators from Designing Motherhood. I've spoken about them a lot. I as much as I can, hype up their project, and need to share how much their project has meant to me in putting together this one.
Tell us about it for those on today that don't know.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I can't represent them completely, but it's an exhibition, and then also a book coming up, or an exhibition catalog that also goes in some other directions, about the designed objects that have defined what they call the arc of human reproduction I'm pretty sure it's 20th century to now. I haven't yet read the book. Comes out in September. I've pre-ordered, but looking at objects that, because they're associated with women, because they're associated with parenting and these things that are not considered sort of high design, they've been left out of the conversation about important design in modernity. So things like the breast pump is sort of the classic one that they talk about. This is an incredible invention, and it's gone through a design evolution, and it belongs, I think this is sort of how some of the project started, was thinking that it belongs in somewhere like MoMA, right? It belongs in the permanent collection of a design museum. But it doesn't so far exist in any of those collections. And so part of their getting started on their project was to say, how do we elevate to its rightful place design like that's daily and associated with the body and made specifically for pregnancy, breastfeeding, like we said, the arc of human reproduction. So they do a really incredible job on social media. They use their Instagram as kind of a place to do research in public. They share a lot of what they're working on and what they're discovering, and I'm really very, very impressed by them. So they're at Designing Motherhood if anybody's interested. And I think their show must be coming up very, very soon. It's in Philadelphia if anybody's in the area.
Which museum, do you know?
The Mutter Museum, I know, and then there's a second institution name, and I've yet to figure out whether that means it's in two different places or if they're just both working together, those two institutions, but it's all available on their website and social. These two pieces that we grouped together as being about creativity and motherhood are really different. One is about the idea of the momtrepreneur, the sort of the side hustle, the mom side hustle, selling, in particular, selling luxury vintage, but also then how are those aesthetics then sort of co-opted and incorporated into luxury fashion. So like, what is this sort of behind the scenes role of a bunch of moms who may have stepped away from corporate fashion, that kind of thing. And then the creation story is it's another personal narrative, and it's really special. And this is Juanette, who had children when she was quite young, and then went through, got a lot of education and has, really worked super, super hard in her career, but has also managed to parent 4 children and has found solace, or has found, an avenue for creativity through hand making clothing. She knits and sews. And just to me, it's this sort of idea of weaving together all these strands of a person, that you can be a creative maker and do things essentially just for yourself while you're also, working super hard to provide for a family, and that there are just all these different facets to a parent. And I really love that story. I think it's great. And the 2 reviews are really wonderful. They definitely are of a piece. They're both about a show, and then it's catalog that was on in London last year that had to close early due to COVID, but it's about artwork that has portrayed pregnant people through portraiture and sculpture. It's very British focused, from a whole range of social media, as it says. So it comes right up to Beyonce and Serena Williams and some other, famous images of pregnant women that we've seen recently. And these are really lovely, especially as a piece together. And then the last 2 pieces there are about being a daughter. In one case, it's someone who doesn't have children of her own. And so she's reflecting on, what did her mother mean to her, and using clothing to describe that. And then thinking, so if she ever is going to have children of her own, what will she take from that relationship and move forward, And then the last one is lovely. Anushka's is really reflective and really thoughtful. She lost her mother not long before she started writing it last year. And she's really described to me that it's been a big part of her healing process to write this piece about her mother, really celebrating who her mother was, and particularly describing their relationship through clothing, which was really centered on clothing in a lot of ways. Her mother was familiar with all the tailors and dressmakers and merchants at the fabric stores in Colombo, Sri Lanka, where they lived, and would bring her daughter to get clothes custom made for herself. And then it really describes perfectly well the sort of tension between mothers and daughters around clothing sometimes, right? Where there are ideas about what the daughter should wear, and then there is, sometimes hesitance to reject. But it's just really interesting, complicated stuff about motherhood and daughterhood. And she now has kids of her own. And again, it's about sort of carrying on a legacy and that kind of thing. So yeah, I didn't really intend to go over every single piece, but.
Thank you so much for doing that. I think it just, like, at least for me as well, I know I read some of the pieces, I haven't read all of them yet. It's truly like it whets the appetite. I really want to know more. What a variety of really important and diverse stories and experiences. And thank you so much for going through it all. I think it was really great to hear it from you. It's 12:45. I can't believe we've already spoken for 3/4 of an hour. So I want to give a chance. I know that we've received some questions and some comments. So I would like to open it up to the audience. And I will open it up to all of you. And I could also start talking about what's in the group chat. And I know that Ariel Elia, our FSA coordinator, is also going to help with questions. So why don't I open it up to everyone in the room here first? Any questions for Laura about her work or fashion and motherhood? Please feel free to either put your questions in the group chat or ask them to Laura directly.
In the meantime, I will just plug our next issue that's coming out very soon.
Please do.
Tomorrow is the deadline for submissions for the next issue on fashion and mental health, which was the brainchild of our editor, Sarah. And we're already receiving lots of very exciting stuff. Again, a real diversity of content and voices, and some great artwork that goes along with it too. So we're really excited to put that one together, and we're hoping it comes together by May, June, we were saying. So yeah, the deadline for that is tomorrow. It would be, and of course we're very open to even just getting an email where someone says, I have this idea and I haven't really developed it yet. And if you only have time to do that by tomorrow, that's fine too. But yeah, look out for it sometime in the next few months.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So yes, like Laura said, fashion and mental health is going to be the next issue. And so look out for our, and if you go on Fashion Studies Journal, you could see the link there. But I wanted to bring up a comment that was put into the chat by Denise Giroux. And Denise says that she was struck in several of the articles in the Motherhood and Fashion issue of the mention of laundry, and how that is such a common reality when you're talking about motherhood and clothing. So I wanted to know if you could expand a little bit on that, if it resonated with you, or did you expect it? How did you feel about it?
Well, it's a bit of a pet subject for me. I wrote in my own piece that it is sort of one of the realities that crashes down pretty early on to bringing a baby or child into your home and family, is that fashion is just future laundry. And that was something that I encouraged Amy to include in her piece as well. When she was describing it to me as we spoke, I thought, okay, this is actually, there is something there that we often, and this is sort of for fashion in general, so we often forget about the laundry component. You know, when we think of fashion, we think of clothes when they're being worn. We think of them when they're hanging on a hanger or on a mannequin or on, you know, in an image, or we rarely think of them when they have been worn and they have become a job, right? When they've become a chore, when they've become something that often sort of accumulates in your home, especially if there are small people who go through clothing very quickly. So I really think it's important. This is kind of part of how I like to look at fashion and clothing in general, and especially when it relates to motherhood, is like, what about the most mundane part of it? What about the gross reality? What about the, you know, the fact that we put clothing on our bodies and then it becomes dirty? You know, I mean, it's not glamorous, it's not beautiful, it's just what it is. And so it is, I think, an important, that's an important part of fashion to talk about. And in terms of, as Denise says, I can see there in the chat, that it also has a huge connection to the impact of clothing, or the impact of the fashion system. The fact that clothing is often not made well enough anymore to even withstand being laundered very much. It's one of the ways we can see how fashion sort of moves through its life cycle, right? And it's an area for inquiry, that's for sure. You know, how can laundry obviously is a convenience that has made a lot of things possible in life, and especially for women and mothers, right? If there weren't laundry machines, we would have not been able to do a lot of the things in public life that we've been able to do. But also there's a, you know, detrimental impact on all the water use and all of that stuff. So I think that looking at fashion as laundry, very important, very key to what we want to do.
Absolutely. We have one other question that was, what was one of the biggest struggles parents faced?
Ooh. Well, I think the pandemic has made some of that hyper clear, that it's a major struggle to balance, you know, a public self, you know, a work life with what's necessary in a home if you have young people there, small people. In terms of fashion, I think one of the biggest struggles that parents face is what I talked about, not knowing who you are anymore, not feeling as connected to who you were before becoming a parent, and therefore not knowing how to dress, right? We all know that putting ourselves together as dressed bodies is a huge part of how we negotiate who we are in the world. And when that becomes confused, when we aren't sure who we are in the world anymore, which is a pretty common experience when you go from person to parent, then clothing can become less a source of joy and fulfillment and more of a chore and burden. But of course, every parental struggle is different. But I think, yeah, balance is probably the overall, what I would think was the worst and hardest.
Absolutely, especially in the, you know, the confinement and that everyone was in, especially in the earliest parts of the pandemic. Laura, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today and allowing for us to get to know you. And thank you so much for sharing this fashion and motherhood issue and your experience. I wanted to remind all of our viewers out there that this issue is completely free and available to anyone on the fashionstudiesjournal.org. And if you are interested in submitting articles or communicating with Fashion Studies Journal, please feel free to communicate. Laura's very much proactive in, again, building this community and dialogue. And I wanted to give you, if you have any last words before we let everyone go today. Thank you, everyone, for your interest and for coming here today. Laura, I'll leave it to you.
Sure. Well, I was just reminded me to say, you can sign up for the newsletter. We have a semi-regular newsletter that we put out. It's again, like everything we do, capacity based, but it does come out sometimes when we have new news. So you can sign up for that on the website. And we do also have a little initiative we're putting together now, working on to have guest editors come and put together their own themed issues similar to Fashion Motherhood. You could use that as the model. But if you have an idea for a collection of fashion related research and artwork that you'd like to see, something that you have some expertise in, then we would absolutely love to have a proposal for a guest edited issue, and we'll be putting out our official call for that any day now. So please, keep your eyes peeled for that. And we are at Fashion Studies Journal and fashionstudiesjournal.org.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much, Laura. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. And this video is recorded and will be available on our YouTube and Fashion Studies Journal's YouTube. So please feel free to share it and look out for it.
Thank you all so much. So great to be here.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.